is there are so many directions we can go from this with questions that people may ask, and I invite the members of our community to consider the questions that you have and to place them in the chat. One thing, I'll get us started. One thing that struck me, Dr. Johnson, I was wondering early on in the talk if animism would come up in the conversation. And so you did bring it up in references to the work of Mbembe. And so what strikes me is how animism is in a way intellectually reasserting itself in the post-Enlightenment West in the form of panpsychism, right? This is becoming now, right, acceptable in the Western intellectual discourse to consider that even beneath the higher animals, that different forms of material and organic structuring have experience, have consciousness in some way. They are units of experience. And I'm curious, in your reflections on this or of your colleagues, are you seeing how panpsychism is being brought into this conversation about technology, or maybe needs to be brought in such a way that it hasn't yet, as we consider what is the domain of personhood beyond the human? So that's the question that came to mind for me.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Chris. And the answer is resoundingly, absolutely. Yes, this effort to try to understand how to manage technology in a way and to govern it in a way that doesn't simply reproduce dehumanization and inequality has drawn richly on things such as non-human animal studies, for instance. It has drawn particularly on knowledge forms, philosophical systems that are represented in what you rightly pointed to, what is historically has been named in Western scholarly circles as animism or as fetishism, and often in order to be derisive, but ironically in ways that demonstrate that human exceptionalism has never been a global type of assumption. It's been one iteration of many ways that human societies have tried to understand and explain who they are, what the world is, where knowledge exists, what consciousness is, who shares in it. And the book that I'm doing now, I've actually gotten the title because this is going under contract, or is under contract now with Oxford University Press, is Do Robots Have Souls? That's trying to get to this question of the relationship between things and people. But yes, particularly animal studies. And this comes from work of people such as Victoria Breathwaite, for example. So she was a biologist who wrote about pain in non-human animals, and specifically in fish. She published a book about 10 years ago that was very controversial because she argued that fish actually experience pain. And it was a very specific species of fish that she was focusing on. And she had a few scientists who resonated with her arguments and saw her claims and agreed with her interpretation. But most of the scientific experts at that time, it's around 2013, most of them condemned her work. And they said that it was certainly not something that should be promoted, that people should not take this seriously. And in the decades since, that has shifted. But pain is like consciousness. So you asked this question about consciousness, right? It's purely subjective. You can't prove that you're conscious. There's no objective test for consciousness, just as there's no objective test for pain. If you go to the doctor and tell them you're in pain, you can go to a pain expert, and they will not pull out a painometer and hold it up to you and measure your pain. Even though they're the expert, you know what they're going to say. They're going to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, you tell me your pain. But there's no way to prove that anybody can experience pain objectively. It's something that we have to ask. So those are precisely the kinds of reasons that non-human animal studies, that panpsychism, this concern for consciousness present beyond human subjects, has become really integral to engaging critically with these technology questions.
Thank you very much, Sylvester. The questions and comments are starting to come in. We certainly had some comments from Al Parks, who is a student of ours, who is also a trained neuroscientist, just mentioning how the awareness of animism and panpsychism is rising in neuroscience as distinct spatiotemporally linked emergent network patterns reveal fractal patterns shared by many beings. Thank you for that, Elle, and for the reference to, of course, Star Trek is a science fiction series that has parsed many of these questions before, and she mentioned the episode from Star Trek Next Generation about the argument over Commander Data's personhood. I believe the episode is called Measure of a Man. So people go on your streaming service and watch that one. I have a question from our student, Greg Klein. Your thoughts about the science fiction writer Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics as they may apply to entities such as Sophia.
Yes, this is great. So Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics, the robots are never supposed to do any harm. They're supposed to only help humans, and they're supposed to be able, in his fiction, programmed in a way so that they would never create a scenario in which they would do harm. And what his fiction do harm to a human, that is. So what his fiction demonstrated was the practical difficulty of that proposition. It sounds like a great idea at first. Well, let's program these robots so that they will never harm people, and then people won't need to be afraid of them, and we know that we can control them. And interpreting what that means, the devil's in the details, as they said. So that is certainly relevant to what is often designated as algorithmic bias today. So this is one form of the ethical problems that emerge with intelligent machines. They're programmed to do X, Y, Z. It could be facial recognition. It could be suggestion algorithms that end up creating a situation where even if programmers aren't trying to create harmful outcomes, for different kinds of reasons, the software might actually generate something that could be harmful. And you can't simply type into a computer, do no harm. You have to debate what that means. We can watch humans who debate what that means today. If you look at something like euthanasia, providing people a merciful death, is it a form of harm or is it a form of mercy? And biological humans disagree about that. What about machines? Could you get machines to agree about something as complicated as that? So that Isaac Asimov's work, his laws of robotics, they're certainly relevant. Sophia uses a machine learning algorithm architecture that allows Sophia to generate her own speech extemporaneously. You can have a random conversation with Sophia. Sophia can also be programmed to give us a very specific talk. So the keynote talk that she gave at that summit in 2017, that was a pre-programmed speech. But then she generated her own responses when people asked her questions. If you have some free time, it's a weekend, you can get on YouTube and Google Sophia in Saudi Arabia, and you can see Sophia try to respond to people like Will Smith who are trying to engage her in a question. But the point is, it's difficult. And at the same time, because machine systems are increasingly being used out of the necessity of complicated data to provide decision services to people. When I say decision services, that could be as simple as, how do I get from my rental car agency when I land in a city that I don't know to my hotel destination? You use GPS. So the GPS is giving you decisions about how to get there. That's one example. To medical diagnosis. You have an MRI. We know that AI combined with human experts will give a higher percentage of accurate diagnosis in healthcare. So the AI is assisting with that, but it's helping to give a decision outcome. So those are examples of decision services. The concern with AI is that it be made ethical by not doing harm. That's precisely the point of Asimov's laws of robotics. And what we're finding is what he showed in his creative work. It sounds simple, it's incredibly difficult, but we still have to figure it out, because in my view, I don't think we can just hope that AI will go away and we won't have to deal with it. It's not going away. It is going to be even more integral to our human future, and we have to figure these things out. We need solutions.
Thank you, Sylvester. So a question along these lines was raised by Daisy in the chat, talking about our personal digital assistants, saying I often hear people jokingly or not treat Siri, Alexa, or other machines or software programs, we can say, in ways that they wouldn't treat humans, cursing and yelling at them and so on. Do you think this is problematic and something we should be thinking about more consciously? She wonders if dehumanizing machines or software programs may further internalize logics of domination and systems of oppression. Is this being talked about?
Thank you for the question. It's a great one, important one, and a clarifying one for my talk. So I started with Sophia, and I, in that talk, showed a couple of examples of humans combined with machines. And I think a great way of trying to get at this question, the answer to this question, let me just answer the question. I think it's problematic if people act abusively toward machines. If they curse at them, if they yell at them and say, well, it's just a machine, I think that's problematic in many ways. So if you model that behavior for young children, it will encourage young children to be abusive in general to anyone or anything. And so the experts that have actually studied children's interactions with these smart devices have encouraged parents to teach children to be kind and polite. And because it's good to teach people to be kind and polite, period, like full stop, regardless of what the other recipient is. And then to just go a little further with that, one point of my showing humans combined with machine systems is to demonstrate that what we often think of as a problem of human versus machines is actually the rubber's going to hit the road with us, not with some sophisticated AI with general intelligence that can go off on its own and try to get the right to vote. Maybe we'll see that one day, but what we are already seeing is people who are already part machine. They have brain implants for many reasons. I gave an example of two people who were trying to get restored capacity. That was Nathan Copeland, who was suffering from paraplegia, and Claudia Mitchell, who had a smart prosthetic limb. But there are also people who have brain implants to control seizures. The Pentagon is funding aggressively research to allow injured soldiers to get brain implants so that they can have restored memory capacity, not just restored muscle control, but also cognitive, what we think of as cognitive abilities, speech and memory. And so if you have someone with the brain chip that the Pentagon is funding research for, they go into special ops, they have something happens and they get this brain chip either for enhancement or because they need to recover from an injury. And someone says, well, Sylvester, you got a brain chip. Machines can't think and they don't have souls and they're not people. You're part machine. We don't think you should be allowed to vote because we can't. How do we know that the person you're voting for is just the machine? How do we know it's you? Right? So we're already there in a sense that there are people walking around who are part machine. And I think the way to answer that question is a really great question. Is it okay for people to act abusively toward machines? I think the way to answer that question is to actually start with the hybrid, the cyborg. It's to start with the people who are already part machine. Are we willing to actually claim that some people are not fully human because they're part machine? And I think that if we recognize that the human is a political category, and it doesn't mean it doesn't have scientific meanings, it doesn't mean it doesn't have biological meanings, it does. But its most consequential, and I would say egregious history has actually been because of its political function. And I would say we need to take seriously that racial history of capital in order to understand the ethical path forward in this digital future and technological future of humanity. And if we do that, I think we have to not deprive people of human status based on what part machine they are. And I think we have to take seriously the ethics of personhood beyond biological humans. So be kind to Siri is what I would say.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Unfortunately, I think I froze for a second there, so I missed the ending of that, but I'm sure it was wonderfully stated. Let's see, I'm looking in the chat again. The other question we've received from our student, Jakaren, is, I guess, looking at practical implications for our students who are being formed to be ministers and chaplains, spiritual leaders. And wondering, just in general, the practical application, how we tie this in, this changing landscape, with this calling to serve others, to engage in spiritual and faith formation. What are some potential implications to consider beyond what you've already named?
Yeah, this is a great question. So there are many. I'll give two quick examples. One of the big human challenges of technology is wealth. Okay, and and it's not just the United States. If we live in the United States, we talk about the United States because we're in. It's global. It's a global question, and the global inequality is real and surging. And so one way that I think that humanists, particularly those who are doing training for ministry, need to understand this is by reconfiguring, reinterpreting what they think a technologist is. All right, so I'm really excited that Starr King School for the Ministry is partnering with Virginia Tech to do a series of workshops that we're calling Future Humans, Human Futures. And it is focused on religion, theology, technology, and ethics. And we're going to do a series of these. So if you happen to be part of Starr King and you're interested in this, we're going to do multiple calls to ask people if they want to participate in workshops. And we'll give long answers to that question. But the short one now is that if you are interested in wealth inequality, take some time to understand how that's connected to the value creation that's happening in technology. Because most of the wealth that's getting generated now and that will get generated in the next 20 to 30 years, most of that is going to happen through technology. So the question is, and it's not that you need to put a computer science degree with your DMin degree or your theology degree, is that we need to try to understand then, how do those who want to achieve and to empower communities economically, how do we do that in a world where most of the economics and most of the wealth is really happening with the monetization and commercialization around technology? That's where it's going. And some of the answer to that is that we have to actually advocate for different kinds of policies to benefit people, okay? And there are so many ways those policies could look, but what we've done in the United States is to limit the ability of profit to only private capital. And we have created a situation where public capital, so our public institutions, don't get to profiteer in participating in the growth of this capital. And a clear example of that is that foundations can manage money and they can build wealth in that way. But our federal government, all we do in our state governments, we just, we get in debt and we try to stay on these limited budgets. So we need policies that will actually allow individuals and public institutions to benefit from monetization of technology. That could be data, that could be analytic insights, and you don't need to have a computer science degree to do that. That's about advocating for changes in policies. Another way we need to do this is in educating our religious communities who are living in a world where all of us are using this technology. In fact, most of our religious communities have had their religious community mediated through this technology, but none of us are, as communities, usually participating in that, in the financial benefits of it. And so maybe this means that we need to change, if we're doing investments for religious communities, or if we're training people to understand what the models look like for community empowerment, maybe we need to add to our ministry the kind of training that can come with the entrepreneurship that we will need to have to get those who are not participating in this prosperity to be at the table, so to speak, of this value growth, because the growth in technology is not going away, the value creation is not going away. And then another quick way I'll say, because I know we're running out of time. So you talked about animism and I spoke about it. There is a huge history of religion and theology that's part of this. And actually most of the fundamental sensibilities that people have toward personhood, most of it is actually shaped by hundreds of years and even thousands of years of religious history. And these theological paradigms, take the soul, for instance, right? Who and what has a soul? Because that idea of the soul is actually a very central way that people for centuries have tried to understand who and what gets to count as human. And I think there will be a practical need to reevaluate that. There are already people who have assistive devices or who have been modified in some way genetically or with machine enhancements who are part of religious communities. And as that continues, I promise you, this is going to become a source of growing, I won't even say contention, I would say the disagreements that people have over this, and a lot of it is rooted in the long history through religious paradigms, those things are going to come to the surface. And so that our religious leaders will need to have some way of answering that question for their parishioners. What about these people who are playing with these machine systems or who are part machine? How should we relate to them? It may sound far-fetched, but pay attention to where this technology actually is. And I'll add one more thing in the medical research, particularly, we'll probably see it there first. So economic empowerment, if you love justice and you're doing economic empowerment, take time to understand how that struggle is already encased in technology, because that's where the future of inequality or equality is going to get played out mostly. It's the monetization around that. And then it's these larger theological questions about personhood, human, that is rooted in these long traditions that religions have.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. As you say, our time is running past us. We do want to make sure we give people an ample break before the panel discussion coming up at 12:30 Pacific time, 3:30 Eastern time, and probably start date 3127.9 or something like that. I will kind of just also last question I'll note from Aize, our adjunct faculty and one of our panelists for the sci-fi panel, as we think about the expansive definition of personhood, animism, and our place in a greater ecology. He's asking a question about biotechnology and its connection to technological futures, thinking of sources of food, habitats, repair of the planet utilizing fungi, etc. Do you see how these biotechnologies call these humanist questions forward?
Absolutely. I think the quickest way to say that is that these technologies are certainly just producing more and more evidence and urgent scenarios for what some thoughtful observers have already noted, that anthropocentrism, having political systems that treat humans as the only things that matter or that matter most is destroying our world, is destroying our system. So much is happening in the future of whether it's food systems or drug therapies that will be based on the mycelia. So these are the fungi that have billions of years of evolutionary history, learning how to fight viruses. That's what these fungi have been doing for billions. They've been here way longer than humans have been here. And they actually have a knowledge for doing it. It's in their DNA. We are actually, we researchers are trying to understand how to learn from those fungi by sequencing their DNA, looking at their genetics for fighting viruses in order to benefit humans. But the point is that none of that should be controlled by, as long as it benefits humans. I've talked about humanistic, human-centered approaches, not to try to advocate for anthropocentrism, not to claim that only humans matter, but actually to call into question the very idea of the human has been very exclusive and needs to be reconceived in light of these things. So those examples in agriculture and food science are really powerful examples of why we cannot act as if only humans matter, and that we need a much more comprehensive way of understanding things like intelligence and life and value. And in this future that we're moving into, those things are very much part of the technologies that are being developed.